Good morning, students. As we continue the lesson, The Blossom Tree, let us first revise all that we have learned in the previous class. So, we saw that there was a king and a queen, and one day, while they were sipping tea at the main chamber of the palace, a piece of plaster fell on the tea of the king. Then the king looked up and saw that there was a crack on the ceiling that went right to the enormous pillar that held the ceiling. It was clear that the pillar was breaking, and if it was not replaced, the ceiling and the entire palace would collapse, killing everyone in the palace. The king saw the danger and immediately sent his servants and the carpenters to search in the palace gardens to find a tree strong enough to build the enormous pillar. The servants searched the gardens and came back with the news that the only tree strong enough to build the pillar of this size is the blossom tree. Hearing this, the king became very sad. He was unable to decide whom to save, whether the blossom tree that he loved or his family and servants who were living in the palace. So, that night he went to the blossom tree itself and prayed to the spirit of the blossom tree for an answer. But the blossom tree did not say anything in return. So, the king decided to cut down the blossom tree, as there was no other way to save the palace and his people. So, students, let's now continue with the lesson. See the last two lines on page 38. As soon as the idea entered his mind, the breezes blowing past his ears heard it, and they whispered it to the birds. And the birds flew away in horror and whispered it to the leaves. And the leaves whispered it to the sun, and the sun whispered it to the entire universe. Soon all creation knew that in the morning the beautiful blossom tree was to die. And deep in the park that night, the spirits of the other mighty trees, magnificent trees, joined her. And they said, "What will you do? You must leave your body tomorrow morning. What will you do? They are going to chop you down." And the blossom tree spirit said, "I have lived in my body for thousands of years. I do not know how to live in another body. What will I do?" "Well," said one of the others, "you should try this." "No, no, blossom tree, you must do this to save yourself." "No, no, no," said another, "do this." But though the proud spirits of the other trees had something to say, in her heart the blossom tree spirit knew that they could not help her. And so, all alone, in the darkness of the night, the blossom tree spirit wept. So, students, as soon as the king decided to chop down the tree, the blossom tree, the spirit of the blossom tree And indeed, the spirit of the other trees and plants and the birds could sense the disaster, the danger that was about to happen to that majestical blossom tree. They could experience what was about to happen to the majestical blossom tree, that it would be cut down by the next morning. So the birds stopped chirping, the air became still, the garden became soaked in an aura of sadness and lifeless. And all of his friends, the trees, one after the other, advised the blossom tree in order to save himself. But the blossom tree knew that they could not help her, so she wept alone in the night. The night passed. All alone she waited, when, in the darkness, an hour before dawn, in the lawn, she heard a tiny voice. "Blossom tree?" "Who is it?" she said. "Blossom tree, it is me, the spirit of the kusha grass. Oh, little kusha grass, can you help me?" "Blossom tree, I have an idea." "What is your idea, little kusha grass?" And the great spirit of the blossom tree leaned over and listened to the tiny voice of the kusha grass. So here in this line, we see that the spirit of the kusha grass spoke to the blossom tree and gave an idea to save himself from the woodcutter. The next morning, two axemen brothers made their way to the city. The blades of the axemen swung past their ankles as they entered the park and walked up to the great trunk of the blossom tree. And one of the brothers knelt down and felt the tree for a place to chop. He said, "Brother, brother, something is wrong here. Feel the trunk here. It is rotten." "No, brother, that is impossible. It was fine yesterday." "No, no, no, feel here, feel here. Do you feel it? It is soft. The blossom tree has gone soft here. It was fine yesterday. I know it was fine yesterday, but look, it is rotten here, and over here too. I can feel it. It is soft. And way up here it is, and down here, and all around here. Brother, brother, the blossom tree has gone rotten in one night. It is a miracle. It is a miracle. It means that it would not work for the pillar." So, the next day, when the woodcutters came to cut the tree and were about to strike their axes on its bark, one of them said that the tree seems to be rotten, as the color of the bark has changed. So they touched and saw that the tree became soft, and it will never be strong enough to make the massive pillar. And so swiftly through the city the two axemen ran, and they found King Brahmadatta with his face in his hands. And they said, "King, the blossom tree has gone rotten in one night. We cannot chop it down." This caused the king to think, and swiftly his mind raced, trying to think of something to do, when suddenly an idea flew into his mind. And he said, "Call the carpenters and the builders, and send them out into the city to bring back 3 trees, 3 great trees. And we must bind them together with bands of brass and make one strong pillar. Now hurry." And so out into the parks the builders and the carpenters ran. They felled 3 mighty trees, and they bound them together with bands of brass, and they replaced the pillar of the palace. So, students, what does this carpenter do after seeing the blossom rotten? They went back to the city. They went back to the king and told the king that the blossom tree had gone rotten in one night and they cannot use that for the pillar. So the king thought of an idea and he sent the carpenters and the builders to bring 3 great trees to replace the pillar. And they did so. So students, now let us see what happens to the blossom tree after that. But back in the park, the spirits of the other trees stared at the blossom tree spirit and asked, "How did you go rotten in one night? Is it possible to go rotten in one night? And even if you do go rotten, you must leave your body anyway." And the spirit of the blossom tree looked at all the others so proud, so magnificent, and she said, "Last night all of you told me what to do, but you could not help me at all. The little spirit of the kusha grass spoke to me. The little spirit of the kusha grass called the little chameleons, thousands of them, to climb up upon my back. Their little bodies were soft, so when the X-Men touched me, they thought I was rotten. But I am not rotten. I am as strong as ever." So students, now that the blossom tree is protected from the carpenters and the builders, again the wind danced beautifully around the branches, and it was as though someone had given new life and joy into the garden. The blossom tree became its own strong, magnificent self again. The other trees were shocked to see this and asked to the spirit of the blossom tree that how it could be well and healthy again. And the spirit of the blossom tree replies that it was all because of the spirit of his friend the kusha grass that he is alive or strong. The blossom tree explained to them that the kusha grass spoke to the spirit of the chameleon, who then caused chameleons to climb on, sit on my trunk, and change their color to that of rotting bark. So when the woodcutters saw it, it appeared as though my trunk was rotting. The chameleons moved quickly to where the woodcutters were touching the bark, so that instead of the trunk, they touched the soft bodies of the chameleons and thought that the trunk was soft and rotten. The spirit of the trees were amazed, and then the blossom tree's spirit spoke one last time. "Henceforward, then, we must remember not to choose our friends and judge them by their magnificence or their will or their fame. but instead we must choose our friends for their faithfulness and the depth of their love. So, students, when the so called mighty trees could not help their friend the blossom tree, it was the wisdom of the kusha grass that saved his life. And with this, Lord Buddha stopped his story. So, friendship and trust are given to those who are wise and faithful. Wisdom and loyalty have nothing to do with the status of a person. We must look at the inherent qualities of a person rather than their outward appearances in terms of wealth, status, age, or occupation. So, students, we must never judge a person on the basis of money, status, color, whether fair or tall, or dark or thin, or wealth, or rather, look at the value of the person and treat everyone with respect.